of dignity. Now, if we are to try and see how best to ensure the protection of the rights to non-discrimination and non-stigmatization, they are unpacked as rights in these important universal documents. We need actionable ethical requirements here. And the moral principle or the moral ground which prohibits discrimination, protects all persons, all moral with autonomy, capacity for moral freedom, in other words, equally. So the principle of equality is tied up with, of course, that of autonomy. It draws from it. It's not separate from it. People's lives, fundamental rights and interest, rights and instinct, should be given equal weight regardless of what the documents say. Now let's talk a little bit, or spare a few moments on rights discourse in universal, in this legal documents, soft law documents at least. Rights principles are abstract and therefore indeterminate. All principles are abstract and therefore indeterminate. They have to be interpreted. To acquire practical import, they need to be interpreted taking into account the relevant circumstances. In interpreting, in contextualizing, implementing, enacting rights, we need to focus on the necessary constraints deriving from their normative core, if what I said earlier is at all adequate. We may start from evident features of human rights, fundamental rights, as set out in the declarations mentioned in the convent. Firstly, human rights are meant to set standards for everyone. Secondly, human rights are not to be considered one right at a time. Each right holder is to enjoy all rights. Thus, human rights are doubly universal. All rights hold for all human beings, don't they? Human rights are for everyone. Any, therefore, coherent interpretation of the rights set in the Universal Declarations must satisfy normative constraints. Each person are to be compatible with one another, compatible with enjoying the same rights all other. The last one is very important, I wish to underline, with the action needed to respect or realize those rights. That means that regarding this last constraint, which I want to say a few words more, it's very powerful constraint. This is where I find that the international declarations are extremely weak on this third constraint, the third consistency constraint on any adequate interpretation. It arises from the considerations it cannot be respected, cannot become actionable, cannot be realized unless some others, persons, organizations, institutions, depending on the required to enact, to perform counterpart duties or safeguard regarding institutions and states that they realize that right. That, of course, means that rights are not too broad in scope, like right to health. Now, who can guarantee a right to health? Just tell me. Perhaps what we mean, and we should mean, is a right, I'm finishing, a right to health care. If they're required to act in which realize the rights in question, it must be possible for them to do so. Adjusting rights to one another can guide action unless it is associated with or it points to the action required if the rights are to be realized. So rights without counter by duties are mere sheer ideals. Good political rhetoric, but that's not enough. Brings me to say is that rights are not absolute. They have, in their interpretation, to be demarcated and harmonized with each other. There is no metric for rights. I regret to say, I'm very skeptical about metrics, according to their internal inconsistency constraints. A right to non-discrimination, a right to non-stigmatization may contribute, I don't have time to expand on this, to realizing particularly the right to healthcare by prioritizing the most vulnerable, equality in available medicines, crossing geographical boundaries. Now, in order to conclude, we have to broaden our ethical perspective, especially when we discuss international human rights law, to take duties more seriously, local, global, national, European level. The agent's perspective matters here because the rights discourse is from the claimant's perspective. We need to focus on the agent's perspective, to allocate corresponding duty to person, institutions, etc., with the capacity and requirement to discharge them. Say attention should be paid to explanatory context. We need to contextualize data, take adequate analysis into account, take the best science, the best evidence-based science into account. And of course, all this requires a global, coordinated effort. My conclusion, a broad ethical framing and coordinated global effort, particularly in the era of new emerging disruptive technologies, digitalization, AI technologies, regarding equality of access to such technologies, fair distribution of benefits, equal opportunities within and across societies, fair distribution and benefit sharing, ensuring accessibility to such technologies, facilitating training in digital disciplines, particularly with respect to disadvantaged groups in society, vulnerable groups, or disadvantaged regions within society, together with the strong negative duties, protections required against old and new forms of discrimination. The chair of the National Commission for Bioethics and Technoethics mentioned these new forms of discrimination and stigmatization, algorithmic discrimination included, but not the only one. I would say we have to include in our considerations and moral reflections the institutional, the necessary practices and policies that ensure, further to what I've just said, environmental protection, environmental sustainability. Thank you for your patience and your attention.
Okay. We eventually reached at the end of the first session. That gives us a few minutes. Are there any questions on behalf of the audience? To our speakers? Yes, there's a question over there. Two people want to ask questions. Yes, please, I would.
Okay, I would like to ask Mr. Julian Savulescu. I have two questions. The first one is about the fact that have the right to select the children they want to have. I mean the gender and the general characteristics. Reminds me the case that was happening years ago in China when women were obligated to have an abortion if their second child was a girl. Unless they were living in villages, so we wanted working hands, etc., etc. what I want to say is that embryos were killed because of their gender, and if I have a girl, for example, I am killing through IVF the other embryos on the lab. So what's about not only autonomy, but also democracy? That's my first question. And secondly, if parents can select their children with the most, the possible characteristics, either a high IQ level or a tall enough baby with green or blue eyes, etc., etc. What is going to happen in the future? Because we were all going to be the same, there will be no difference. So what's about autonomy again? And yeah, that's all. Thank you in advance.
Yeah, thank you. Is it? Yeah, thank you for those questions. We imagine very advanced technologies to see what can happen with the misuse of these existing technologies. So you mentioned the selection of male or female embryos, but you don't even need to talk about selection of embryos. You can talk about abortion or infanticide. I can't remember. I think there's 100 million women missing from the world because in some societies, males are valued more than females. So what is the response to this? I mean, I have two daughters and I want them to enjoy the same opportunities I enjoyed. So the response to this is not to ban technology or not to ban